It's with a lot of pleasure that I present to you today my exploration of the year 1934 in blackball, which I call A Season in the Shadows. Part 1, January to June. The off-season. We begin our adventure on a Thursday night in January, where the original Celtics defeated the New York Renaissance in a basketball game at Public Hall in Cleveland. Professional basketball was in its infancy. There was no league or structure, just teams that barnstormed the country playing against locals or each other. The teams that met in Cleveland were universally acknowledged as the best in the game. The Renaissance were an all-black team and the pride of Harlem. I mention all of this because two of the team's biggest stars, Fats Jenkins and Bill Yancey, spent their summers barnstorming with the New York Black Yankees baseball team. Fats Jenkins was one of the premier leadoff hitters of his day and is also a member of the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame for his exploits on the hardwood. Another Negro leaguer spending the offseason on the basketball courts was Joe Lillard, seen here in the uniform of a team called the Chicago Hottentots. In the summer, Lillard played outfield and pitched for the Chicago American Giants. But baseball and basketball were actually Joe Lillard's second and third best sports. A former star halfback at the University of Oregon, Lillard played for the Chicago Cardinals in the National Football League and was responsible for nearly half the points the Cards scored in 1933. Lillard and Ray Kemp of Pittsburgh were the only two black players in the league in '33. At the urging of Washington Redskins owner George Preston Marshall, neither player was invited back for 1934, and the NFL would remain lily white for the next dozen years. Decades later, two sports stars would make millions of dollars and feature in commercials and on magazine covers. But in 1934, Fats Jenkins and Joe Lillard faced constant discrimination while barnstorming the country year-round for minimal pay in near anonymity. There were other Negro leaguers who spent the winter months playing baseball. In Los Angeles, a team of Negro National League stars called Tom Wilson's Elite Giants competed in the California Winter League, America's first integrated professional baseball league. The league consisted of the Elites and two white teams. All the games were played here at White Sox Park in a black neighborhood in South LA, and almost every game pitted the Elite Giants against one of the white clubs. The league seems to have existed primarily for the entertainment of black patrons. The white teams each included a handful of Major League and AAA players, while the black Elite Giants, as you can see on this stat sheet, included a handful of future Hall of Famers. It doesn't surprise us today that a team with Cool Papa Bell, Willie Wells, Turkey Stearns, Mule Suttles, and Satchel Paige completely dominated their modest opposition. But in 1934, when it was routinely believed that blacks were inherently inferior to whites in everything, it was newsworthy and a source of great pride that these Negro leaguers enjoyed success against top white competition. Ordinarily, there would be winter baseball being played in Cuba, but there was a revolution in September of '33, and the Cuban League was suspended for the '33-'34 winter season. I haven't been able to find many details, but we do know from this article in the Philadelphia Tribune that there was winter baseball in Puerto Rico. Several black ball stars can be found in these two box scores, including a whole team of Cuban players. And our good friend Ted Knorr uncovered this photograph of the Concordia Club in Venezuela that winter, a star-studded assemblage that includes Josh Gibson at the top right, Martin Dihigo, the tall gentleman standing third from the left, and Ted's hero, Rap Dixon, in the center. Also in the picture, though I'm not sure where, are Dominican legend Tetelo Vargas and a Venezuelan shortstop named Luis Aparicio Sr. And here's one more group of ball players playing through the winter, a team called the Philadelphia Royal Giants, consisting mostly of members of the Kansas City Monarchs and brought together by promoter Lonnie Goodwin for one of his baseball tours of the Pacific. This map from the book Gentle Black Giants illustrates the itinerary. 5 months away from home, beginning with a boat from Los Angeles to Tokyo, where harsh weather prevented games from being played. Then Shanghai, China, Manila, the Philippines, and Honolulu, all of which hosted games between the Royal Giants and local competition. The black ball players were admired and respected everywhere they went for their skill and sportsmanship, and returned to LA in early April, just in time for the new season back home. Blackboard's bulletin board. There were two black weekly newspapers that had national distribution thanks to arrangements with Pullman Porters. The Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender were vital communications links for the black community nationwide. A byproduct of that importance that I found interesting was that in the months leading up to the new baseball season, the two papers served as a sort of jobs bulletin board, helping black semi-pro teams find players and opponents. Here are a few examples taken from dozens and dozens of such listings. New backers for Louisville 9. The Louisville Colored Baseball Company has taken over the Louisville Red Sox for the year 1934, and we are wondering if Jim Brown would be interested in managing the club. If so, we would like for him to communicate with us, etc. Omaha plans pro ball club. The backers of the club would like to hear from the former St. Louis Stars players. Only ball players with experience and a reputation are wanted, and others need not apply. Kokomo Ball Club is set for opening. Would like to hear from Baby King, James Nelson, Lewis White, and others. Detroit's Black Tigers to be hot. Would like to hear from young ball players, left-handed pitchers, first basemen, and two good hitting outfielders. Dayton Royals to battle hot nines. Would like to hear from all local clubs, Columbus, Lexington, Louisville, Indianapolis, Cleveland, and Akron, Wright, Glidden, Harris. Altoona Club, booking games. Booking agents of the following clubs are also asked to get in touch with R.L. Forshee: New York Black Yankees, Pittsburgh Crawfords, Homestead Grays, Philadelphia All-Stars, and Baltimore Black Sox. Now let's meet the leading teams in 1934 blackball. After a series of sometimes contentious owners' meetings, the following 6 clubs were announced as members of the Negro National League for the 1934 season: the Chicago American Giants, Cleveland Red Sox, Nashville Elite Giants, Newark Dodgers, Philadelphia Stars, and Pittsburgh Crawfords. There were also several associate members named. These were leading clubs that did not participate in the league, but agreed to respect league contracts in exchange for the right to book games against league members. The newly named commissioner of the NNL was a newspaper columnist named W. Rollo Wilson of the Philadelphia Tribune and Pittsburgh Courier. Wilson was perceived by many to be a figurehead, acting primarily in the best interests of league founder and Pittsburgh Crawfords owner, Gus Greenlee. Gus Greenlee was a numbers banker and nightclub operator who turned the Crawfords into blackball's flagship club in just a few short years. His Craws played at the ballpark Greenlee built for them and were managed by the great Oscar Charleston. Charleston was one of 5 future Hall of Famers in the galaxy of stars Greenlee assembled, along with Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, Cool Papa Bell, and Judy Johnson. The Crawfords' main rival for league supremacy was the Chicago American Giants. The team Rube Foster founded was now owned by Undertaker Robert Cole, who liked to promote the club as Cole's American Giants. The team had spent the 1933 season playing home games in Indianapolis because their ballpark was converted by the city into a dog racing track, but they were back in Chicago for 34. The American Giants manager since Foster's breakdown in 1926 has been Gentleman Dave Malarcher, a former infielder who was groomed by both Foster and C.I. Taylor. There were 4 future Hall of Famers on the American Giants squad: Turkey Stearns, Willie the Devil Wells, Mule Suttles, and pitcher Willie Foster. Ed Bolden, owner of the Hilldale Club and founder of the Eastern Colored League in the 1920s, returned to baseball in 1933 with a team called the Philadelphia Stars, and they made their league debut in 34. The team played at Passon Field, a ballpark with lights owned by a rival promoter, and were managed by another Rube Foster disciple, junk ball pitcher Webster McDonald. Philadelphia featured 2 future Hall of Famers, the fearsome Judd Wilson and old Hilldale star Biz Mackey. Tom Wilson, whose Elite Giants played in the California Winter League, owned a league team in Nashville of the same name. The Nashville Elite Giants were longtime members of the Negro Southern League and recently had made the jump up to Major League quality ball, in part because of the impressive young talent Wilson had assembled. Wilson also built his own ballpark in Nashville's largest Black community and selected the venerable Candy Jim Taylor to manage the young squad. The Newark Dodgers were one of 2 brand new teams created out of whole cloth to join the NNL in 34. I confess to know nothing at all about owner Charles H. Tyler. They played at General Electric Field in suburban Bloomfield and named the great Dick Lundy to build and manage the team. Because Dick Lundy has been ignorantly kept out of Cooperstown, there's only 1 future Hall of Famer on the Dodgers roster, 20-year-old third baseman Ray Dandridge. The latest attempt in the 15-year quest to establish a Negro League foothold in northern Ohio was the Cleveland Red Sox, a brand new club founded by Prentice Bird, pictured here, and Dr. Edward L. Langram. They would play at League Park, home of the Indians, and were managed by another Rube Foster alum, Bobby Williams. The best of the associate members of the league was the Pittsburgh-based Homestead Grays, founded, owned, and operated and managed by Cumberland Posey. The Grays existed in an uneasy truce with Gus Greenlee's Pittsburgh Crawfords. They spent most of their days on the road, but used Greenlee Field and sometimes Forbes Field for occasional games at home. There were 2 future Hall of Famers on the Grays, both at the start of their careers: first baseman Buck Leonard and pitcher outfielder Ray Brown. The 2 men would be cornerstones of the Homestead dynasty that began later in the decade. J.L. Wilkinson's Kansas City Monarchs had been a blackball powerhouse since their founding in 1920. After the first Negro National League collapsed in 31, Wilkinson took his team on the road with an innovative portable lighting system, delivering quality baseball to small towns throughout the western United States and Canada. Their infrequent home games were played at Mulebach Field, home of the minor league Blues. Their manager and only Hall of Famer was the legendary 2-way star Bullet Rogan. His squad was an interesting mix of longtime Monarchs veterans and talented youngsters on the rise. The final team of big league quality was the New York Black Yankees. They were owned by James Semler, but run by booking agent Nat Strong, pictured on the left. Strong controlled all baseball bookings in the New York City area outside of the 3 big league ballparks and had since the 1910s. No friend of black baseball, Strong considered black versus black games bad for business and kept New York City on the periphery of league baseball during his reign. The Black Yankees, who wore hand-me-down uniforms donated by their white namesakes, played their home games across the Hudson River at Hinchcliffe Stadium in Paterson, New Jersey. The team was managed by second baseman George "Tubby" Scales and featured basketball star Fats Jenkins in the outfield. There was something magical about the moment I discovered in the black press that Negro League teams engaged in spring training. It seems obvious now that they would, but uncovering the details somehow made blackball more real and alive for me. Most teams headed for the South, just like their major league counterparts. Louisiana was the most popular destination, though teams seemed to spend plenty of time in Tennessee, Arkansas, and Texas as well. Unlike the major leaguers, blackball spring training was something of a traveling roadshow, with teams basing themselves in multiple locations during the month of April. Early spring results showed signs of rust. The Chicago American Giants lost their spring opener to the New Orleans Crescent Stars by the football score of 24-12. A week later, the mighty Pittsburgh Crawfords lost a game 7-5 to Piney Woods College from Mississippi. The New York Black Yankees were one of the clubs that trained at home, playing games in the greater New York area rather than traveling south. While the Pittsburgh-based Homestead Grays traveled all the way to Wheeling, West Virginia to establish their training camp. The baseball season in Philadelphia opened in early April with a contest between the Biz Mackey All-Stars and a team known alternately as the Zulu Jungle Giants or Zulu Cannibal Giants. This ball club exploited every racist stereotype imaginable, including taking the field in grass skirts and war paint. As you can see in the box score, the players were given tribal names like Wampu and Zanzibab to play under. Unsurprisingly, this show was quite popular with white audiences, and the team lasted into the 1940s. Future stars like Dave Barnhill and Hall of Famer Buck O'Neill made their professional debuts in the grass skirts of the Zulu Giants. Back in the realm of real baseball, Satchel Paige announced he was in shape by hurling a 3-hit shutout against the New Orleans Caulfield Ads. At the end of April, teams broke camp and headed north, playing games in the Mid-South along the way in preparation for the opening of the league season the second weekend of May. Before we dive into that season, I'd like to take a look at the Negro National League schedule because it's very different from what we're used to from the white major leagues and helps us understand the rhythms and cadences of the blackball season. For one thing, a Negro League schedule was more suggestion than scripture. This first half schedule, released in all the black newspapers in late March, would be heavily revised in mid-season. The schedule gave dates and matchups, but didn't indicate which dates were double headers, and that seemed to be at the discretion of the teams. Trying to follow along with the schedule is an impossible task. Some dates were seemingly never played, while some off days saw games between league teams that may or may not have counted in the standings. The schedule also includes games between league teams and associate teams, which definitely didn't count in the standings. This calendar shows how many matchups were scheduled for each date in June of 1934. And as you can see, league games were almost exclusively played on the weekends. The sad reality of black baseball was that their core audience couldn't support a full slate of daily games, and the only way for teams to make money was to fill their weekdays with barnstorming contests against white opponents. One last thing to note is that no effort was made to create a balanced schedule. This chart shows how many dates each team had scheduled against each league opponent, and it's insanely imbalanced. Chicago plays 12 home dates, Cleveland plays 5, Newark only 3. Cleveland is scheduled for 7 games against Nashville and just 8 against the rest of the league combined. Some teams play 19 dates, others 15, and Newark only 8. It's a messy situation created by messy economic realities, but it unfortunately interfered with holding a fair and equitable competition. Now let's take a look at the opening weekend of the NNL season, beginning Saturday, May the 12th. It's opening day at Passon Field in Philadelphia, and managers Webster McDonald and Dick Lundy shake hands before their clubs, the Philadelphia Stars and Newark Dodgers, make their league debuts. Pre-game festivities included an on-field performance by the Elks Band and a ceremonial first pitch thrown out by State Athletic Commissioner Bob Nelson. The Stars won the contest 12-0 behind the sensational pitching of 21-year-old left-hander Stuart Slim Jones, who threw a 3-hit shutout with 9 strikeouts. The following afternoon, the two teams opened the season in Newark with a doubleheader, which the Stars swept. This photo shows Stars center fielder Pete Washington, who hit a grand slam the previous afternoon, scoring for Philadelphia. In the other opening series, the league favorite Pittsburgh Crawfords and Chicago American Giants split a 4-game set in Chicago. The highlight was Sunday's doubleheader. The Craws took the opener 7-0 as Satchel Paige threw his own 3-hit shutout with 2 walks and 9 strikeouts, exactly like Slim Jones did for Philly the day before. In the nightcap, home runs by Mule Suttles and Turkey Stearns and a triple by Willie Wells helped the American Giants to a 9-2 victory. And here's some action from that Sunday's doubleheader. At the top, that's Chicago's pitcher Melvin Powell singling, and below, American Giants star Alex Radcliffe being doubled off first. The first baseman, number 7, is the Crawfords' Oscar Charleston. And while the Nashville Elite Giants were idle during the league's opening weekend, they did receive some unsettling news. Pictured here are Walter Steel Arm Davis and Ted Double Duty Ratcliffe, a pair of veterans acquired by the Elites to provide a steadying influence for their young roster. On the eve of the season, the pair jumped the team to play for a club in Jamestown, North Dakota. A high-stakes semi-pro league in North Dakota had started waving money around at Negro League stars, and Davis and Radcliffe jumped at the bait, seriously harming Nashville's pennant aspirations. Now let's take a look at the first half trials and tribulations of the Cleveland Red Sox, a team starting from scratch as a brand new entry in the Negro National League. Since the institution of league ball in 1920, 8 different teams had tried and failed to establish a foothold in Cleveland. None of the 8 lasted more than one season. Only one managed a 500 record. There's a lot of hyperbole in the headline you see here, and I suspect it was more of a wish than an observation. In early March, the Red Sox announced that, quote, they will most likely play in Cleveland's beautiful $3 million stadium on the lakefront, end quote. The team also announced that its manager would be former St. Louis Stars third baseman Dewey Creasy. In actuality, the Sox would make the more modest League Park their home, but that turned out to be the least of their worries. Just 2 weeks after that announcement, League Commissioner W. Rollo Wilson declared that Creasy had signed a contract with the Philadelphia Stars before agreeing to manage the Red Sox and returned the player to Philadelphia. This left Cleveland without a manager just weeks before the start of spring training. Just before departing for the South, the Red Sox named Bobby Williams manager. Williams was a former shortstop for Rube Foster's American Giants and managed the Pittsburgh Crawfords when they made the jump from Sandlot Club to professional team under Gus Greenlee in 1931. Williams may have been a good choice, but the unfortunate reality is that the man who should have assembled the debut roster was instead meeting his players on the ride to spring training. The Red Sox were scheduled to play the Homestead Grays in a home-and-home series during opening weekend, but this headline tells us rain canceled the contests. The article under the headline, however, tells a different story. New Orleans, Louisiana, May 18th. Cleveland Red Sox Ball Club had to call off their ball games with the Grays at Pittsburgh Saturday on account of serious illness of two of their men. Just as the team was about to leave for Pittsburgh, first baseman McAllister and Reynolds were taken very ill with ptomaine poisoning, and both were in a serious condition from Wednesday until Thursday night. Things only got worse for Cleveland once they took the field. They made their league debut on Saturday, May 27th in Nashville, and got swept by the Elites 12-0 and 6-1. The two teams met again on Tuesday and in a Memorial Day doubleheader Wednesday, and the Elites swept those three games as well. Nashville ran their winning streak up to 6 with a resounding 17-1 thrashing in the Sox home opener at League Park the following weekend, before Cleveland finally won a game, a 3-2 walk-off, which I'd love to know more about. As you might expect, there wasn't a whole lot of talent on that Red Sox roster, but there were two capable youngsters with promising futures ahead. On the left is pitcher Bill Bird, who went 2-8 as the so-called ace of Cleveland's staff, but would go on to pitch in 5 East-West All-Star games with the Elite Giants. And on the right is 22-year-old rookie second baseman Pat Patterson. Patterson represented the Sox in this year's East-West game, his first of 6 in a long and successful career. On June 9th, the Red Sox were swept by the Crawfords at Greenleaf Field, and as you see here, Josh Gibson hit 3 home runs in the opener. But for me, the low point of Cleveland's first half occurred in the second game of another swept doubleheader, this one at home against the Philadelphia Stars. Bill Bird dropped a tough 1-0 pitcher's duel to Webster McDonald. As best I can tell from the box score, the Stars' winning run was scored in the 7th inning by the man whose double dealings put the Red Sox in their unfortunate position in the first place, would-be manager Dewey Creasy. Now let's look at the dealings of an infinitely more successful franchise, the Homestead Grays. These are the Homestead Grays of 1931, generally regarded as one of the greatest sides in black ball history. The Grays' record against all competition that year was 130, 28, and 2. Against top-level competition, they went 52 and 24. With Hall of Famers Oscar Charleston, Josh Gibson, Judd Wilson, Willie Foster, and Smokey Joe Williams, this side was one of the most talented ever assembled. The owner, operator, and manager of the Grays was 44-year-old Cumberland Posey, who first joined the club as a sandlot player in 1911 and nurtured them over the years into an Eastern blackball powerhouse. But in 1931, the year of his team's greatest triumphs, Posey was faced with an existential crisis. The crisis's name was Gus Greenlee, and he was a powerful numbers banker and nightclub owner in Pittsburgh. In 1931, Greenlee took over a sandlot team called the Crawfords and set out to use his vast wealth to create a new power in Pittsburgh baseball. Greenlee's first big catch was the great Satchel Paige, who pitched in 1 game for the Grays in 1931 before following the lure of Greenlee's cash. But Gus's biggest moves were made in the offseason. 5 regulars, including future Hall of Famers Oscar Charleston, Judd Wilson, and 20-year-old Josh Gibson, left Homestead to join the Crawfords. Additionally, that season, Gus built Greenleaf Field in Pittsburgh's Hill District, a black-owned and black-built ballpark for black baseball, constructed in the middle of the Depression, a remarkable feat. Posey responded as he always did, by hitting the road. He couldn't afford to wage war with Greenlee, and he couldn't disdain Gus's new league either, because Posey needed the bookings against other leading teams. So Posey settled for an associate role in the NNL and barnstormed in this new Ford bus. Even with the loss of players, the Homestead Grays were a solid brand name in the small towns in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia, where they'd been playing for years. Even as an associate member, Posey knew he couldn't get a fair deal in the league. In spring of '34, two of the Grays' remaining stars, Vic Harris and Leroy Morney, were awarded to the Crawfords by Greenlee's puppet commissioner W. Rollo Wilson. But even with all the player losses, Posey consistently put a solid team on the field. I show them as 8-6 against league teams in the first half, and they posted a winning record versus Philadelphia and a 3-3 tally against the American Giants. But Homestead's big test would come on the 4th of July, when they would face their crosstown rivals in a holiday doubleheader at Greenlee Field. Now for the tale of Slim and the Stars. Stuart Slim Jones was the sensation of the 1934 season. Standing 6'6", just 21 years old, the Southpaw's modest career stats entering 1934 give no hint at what was coming. But after a disappointing campaign with his hometown Baltimore Black Sox in '33, Jones spent the winter pitching in Puerto Rico, where he discovered command of his blazing fastball. And the results were phenomenal. These game lines are the highlights of Jones's first half, beginning with that opening day shutout of Newark. In these 6 complete games, he threw 4 shutouts and had a cumulative ERA of 0.50. He allowed 6 or fewer hits in each of these starts and averaged better than a strikeout per inning. The May 23rd shutout of the Crawfords was a particular highlight. Slim outpitched Blackball's best, Satchel Paige, under the lights in York, Pennsylvania, with each pitcher recording 11 strikeouts. When I try to imagine Slim Jones in 1934, I think of Vida Blue when he first broke through with Oakland in '71, or closer to home, Dwight Gooden in his first 2 years with the Mets. All 3 pitchers were impossibly young, impossibly fast, impossible to hit, and generated electricity every time they took the mound. But the Stars were more than just Slim Jones, and that's why they emerged in the first half as a viable challenger to Pittsburgh and Chicago. We've already met their 2 Hall of Famers, Judd Wilson and Biz Mackey. Boojum Wilson was particularly outstanding, a talismanic presence in the Philly lineup. And manager Webster McDonald was an effective number 2 pitcher behind Jones, a slop ball artist nicknamed 57 Varieties for his vast repertoire of breaking pitchers. And the Stars enjoyed one big advantage over their rivals: defense. Second baseman Dick Say, shortstop Jake Stevens, and center fielder Pete Washington were all Gold Glove caliber and provided a solid defensive core up the middle, unrivaled in blackball. And now for a very pleasant digression. I enjoy going through the old newspapers because I find things there that make Negro League baseball come alive, and this is one of my favorite examples. A gentleman named George Lee did a series of sports cartoons in the Chicago Defender that remind me of the Bill Gallo and Bruce Stark cartoons I used to see every day in the New York Daily News growing up. I'm delighted to share these beautiful pieces with you here. Here's Lee's portrait of Mule Suttles, slugging star of the American Giants. American Giants manager, gentleman Dave Malarcher. And yes, Mr. Groh, if you're out there, I'll send you a copy of this file. Not baseball, but I couldn't resist including this piece on Poker Face Joe Louis, world's amateur light heavyweight champion. Chicago pitcher Melvin Putt Powell. Sports star Joe Lillard. The venerable John Henry Pop Lloyd, 50 years old and still playing for a team in Atlantic City. Here's the great Turkey Stearns. Nashville manager Candy Jim Taylor, one of the famous Taylor brothers, and the Negro League's all-time leader in games managed. And finally, American Giants catcher Larry Brown. The Negro Southern League was the leading black minor league. It was founded in 1920, the same year Rube Foster launched the Negro National League, making it the oldest continuously running black professional baseball league. It would keep that title until its demise in 1951. When we say the Negro Southern League ran continuously, we're really saying that the league showed up at the start of each season. Finishing the campaign was another matter. Operating a black professional baseball league was always difficult, but the challenges presented by segregation and discrimination were many times worse for a league operating in the Deep South. Pictured here are the men who met in Memphis in February to lay out plans for the 1934 season. And this is the league that was announced: the Atlanta Athletics, Birmingham Giants, also frequently referred to as the Black Barons, Cincinnati Tigers, Louisville Caps, also known as Louisville Black Sox, Memphis Red Sox, Monroe Monarchs, and the defending champion New Orleans Crescent Stars, who may or may not have been members of the league, depending on which newspaper you read. Southern League teams entertained National League teams during spring training, and in May the Southern League opened, as always, with excitement, optimism, and occasionally even published box scores. But the shine didn't last long. Keeping teams in the league all season was usually a problem. We see here Louisville quitting the league in June, but at least they showed up. The Atlanta Athletics appear to have never played a league game. The sad reality is that a black team couldn't make money playing exclusively in the South, and at some point had to hit the road. If a month spent in the Midwest meant a month's worth of league games unplayed, so be it. There were even problems knowing what had happened with the teams that did stick it out. These are league standings from 3 consecutive weeks of the Chicago Defender. Follow along with me here. Monroe goes from 4-3 to 7-6 to 6-7. Birmingham goes from 5-6 one week to 5-5 the next week. Louisville goes from 4-8 to 5-5. None of these standings do the wins total equal the losses total. It's an impossible situation to unravel. In July, the Chicago Defender announced that the New Orleans Crescent Stars were first-half champions, even though they never appeared in the league standings published in that newspaper. We know that the Negro Southern League played some pretty good baseball. Its teams were competitive against Negro National League clubs, and many of its players would graduate to successful big league careers. But as far as knowing who did what, a lot of that will have to remain a mystery. Now, here are a few stories from the first half that are noteworthy but don't fit neatly into the rest of the narrative. In January, the Sporting News, the self-proclaimed Bible of baseball, made a rare mention of black baseball and an even rarer admission of its quality. It came in an article about the many nationalities represented in baseball, written in response to the Phillies signing Hawaii native Hank Prince Oana. We will not go into the justice of the color line here and at this time, but we do know that there is a color line and that it is adhered to most strictly. We all know that the Negroes of America list among their race some of the greatest ball players the game has seen, and that right now they have a flock of stars who would be eligible for the big show, but for the color line. And then the Bible of baseball went back to completely ignoring black baseball, just as it always had. An important step toward integration was announced in April. The prestigious Denver Post Tournament, the leading semi-pro competition in the country, announced that for the first time in its 20-year existence, it would allow black players to participate. The Kansas City Monarchs immediately entered the tournament, to be held in Denver in August. I thought this story was fun. Pittsburgh Crawfords announced that boys can attend Saturday home games for free. No word what the policy was for girls or if any showed up to find out. In 1933, Rap Dixon and Judd Wilson teamed to be a formidable 1-2 in the Philadelphia Stars lineup. Dixon, recognized as one of the game's finest players, spent his winter in Venezuela, and as we saw in the photograph Ted Knorr provided. As best anyone can tell, it was in Venezuela that Dixon injured his back. Now, on the eve of opening day, comes word that Rapp was unceremoniously released by Ed Bolden's Stars while lying in a Philadelphia hospital. The report in the Pittsburgh Courier added that Dixon's condition is considered serious. This story ran in several leading black newspapers. Chicago police reported holding Crawford pitcher. Satchel Paige detained by cops. Leroy Satchel Paige is being detained on orders from the Pittsburgh Police Department. Paige is a member of the Pittsburgh Crawfords baseball team, but was reported on his way to Bismarck, North Dakota. It has not been revealed under what charges the elongated hurler is being held, but since it is known that he has received money for services not yet rendered, it is likely that charges will be based along those lines. Apparently, Satchel was approached by that North Dakota semi-pro league Steel Arm Davis and Double Duty Radcliffe jumped to. I haven't come across any follow-up to this story, although I'm sure there's one out there somewhere. A year later, Paige did in fact jump to North Dakota, but that's a story for another day. This item reminds me of Nelson Mandela's quote about a steady accumulation of 1,000 indignities. The Chicago Giants referred to here are the American Giants, their opponents a white semi-pro team from Philadelphia. Chicago Giants dropped 2 to Raphael. Negro League leaders dropped 2 tilts as curfew halts rally. When the police stepped in and ordered the umpire to call the game, the Giants had scored 7 runs in the 8th inning and just about had the game sewn up, but the score reverted to the completed 7th frame with Raphael ahead 7-6. John Donaldson is one of the most difficult blackballers to evaluate because he generally disdained league play for barnstorming against questionable competition. But for over 20 years, readers were regularly treated to reports of astonishing achievements by the mysterious left-hander. In this year's example, the 43-year-old hurler pitched a one-hit shutout with 23 strikeouts against, quote, the local leaguers of Rockford, Illinois. And at the end of June comes word that Cumberland Posey's Homestead Grays have been incorporated. This is significant because one of the named incorporators is Rufus Jackson, pictured here. And Rufus Sonny Man Jackson was a gangster, partner, and rival of Gus Greenlee in Pittsburgh, and would bankroll Posey's future efforts to compete with the Crawfords. Now let's explore the Negro National League's first half pennant race. There's some foolishness in trying to follow a Negro League pennant race, which can be illustrated by the April ruling of Commissioner Wilson that the Pittsburgh Crawfords were league champions for the 1933 season. While no pennant winner had been formally declared, the last published standings showed the American Giants comfortably in front, and most everyone assumed they were the champs. Wilson's ruling basically stated that certain wins in the American Giants' record were actually non-league exhibitions and didn't count in the standings. And this is a perennial problem when following league ball. Not every league game was played, and not every game played was a league contest. And of course, not every game was reported on. So you can get a basic idea of what's going on, but nailing down specifics to conform with the published standings is basically impossible, which won't stop us from trying at least a little bit. The league standings published after Memorial Day show Chicago and Pittsburgh tied for first, with the Philadelphia Stars and Nashville Elite Giants close behind. Nashville and Cleveland's records are missing several Elite Giants wins that would be picked up in future standings. The first real shocker of the league season took place on Sunday, June 3rd, when the upstart Newark Dodgers, misidentified in the headline as the Bears, swept a doubleheader from the mighty Crawfords at Greenleaf Field in Pittsburgh. One can only imagine how angry Gus was watching his Craws surrender 26 runs before a big home crowd. Everyone in the Newark lineup hit that day, but special recognition must be given to left fielder Buddy Burbage, who went 8 for 10 in the doubleheader with a triple in the opener and double and homer in the nightcap. Burbage, whose given first name was Nolington, was in the middle of a solid, if undistinguished, 13-year Negro League career. But this big afternoon wasn't an anomaly because Buddy Burbage was something special in 1934. The stats at Seamheads show him batting .422 on the season with a .496 on-base percentage and .586 slugging percentage. He would wind up leading the league for the year in batting average, on-base percentage, OPS, and weighted on-base average. The headline that we've been viewing is from the Chicago Defender. The hometown Courier had a different take on the Crawfords weekend. Newark splits 4-game series with Craws. Dodgers win 2 on Sunday, lose to Matlock, Page. Now, it's true that Leroy Matlock and the Craws defeated Newark on Saturday, but Monday's win credited to Satchel Paige occurred in a game that, by multiple accounts, was called in the 4th inning due to rain. A game called in the 4th isn't official, but the Courier apparently counted it. Did the Negro National League include the win in the standings? I haven't been able to determine that one way or the other, but with Gus Greenlee running the league, my guess is that it did. The Crawfords rebounded to beat up on Philadelphia and Cleveland while Chicago was mostly idle from league play, and the standings published 2 weeks later showed Pittsburgh on top 2 games ahead of the American Giants. And that's where the league sat on the eve of a huge 4-game series between the 2 leaders in Chicago. The American Giants took the series opener on Saturday as Ted Trent threw a 7-hit shutout to outduel Harry Tin Can Kincannon 1-0. Willie Foster did Trent one better by throwing a 6-hit shutout in the first game of Sunday's doubleheader to defeat William Bell. And in the nightcap, Satchel Paige showed everybody what good pitching looked like by throwing a 1-hit shutout. And this is what the top of the standings looked like heading into Monday's series finale. A Pittsburgh win would restore the Crawfords' 2-game lead, while Chicago would pull into a virtual tie if they won. Chicago had a favorable schedule over the last 2 weeks, so the game was particularly critical for the Crawfords. The starting pitchers were Leroy Matlock for Pittsburgh and Shug Cornelius for Chicago. In the top of the first, the Crawfords loaded the bases with 1 out, but Cornelius retired a pair of all-stars, Judy Johnson and Vic Harris, to escape unscathed. In the bottom half of the first, Turkey Stearns walked, was bunted over to second by Willie Wells, and scored on Alex Radcliffe's single. American Giants lead 1-0 after 1. The Crawfords tied the game in the third. Cool Papa Bell led off the inning with a walk and moved to third on Jimmy Crutchfield's second base hit of the afternoon. Oscar Charleston popped out to shallow left, but then Josh Gibson walked to load the bases with 1 out. Judy Johnson hit a ground ball to first. Mule Suttles fielded the ball, stepped on first for the force, and threw home. But Cool Papa Bell beat the tag because, well, you know, he was Cool Papa Bell, and the score was tied at 1. And then, consistent with the rest of the series, the pitchers took over. Neither team scored through the 10th inning as Matlock and Cornelius hung a string of zeros on the board. But in the last half of the 11th, Willie Wells singled, then Mule Suttles launched a 1-1 fastball off the right field wall for a walk-off double to give the American Giants a 2-1 victory and 3-1 edge in the crucial series. First half champions. So with 2 weeks left to play, the American Giants and Crawfords were in a virtual tie for first. But Chicago had more league games remaining than Pittsburgh, and 4 of those were against the hapless Cleveland Red Sox. The American Giants won 3 of 4 in Nashville to close in on the title, then swept a 4-game series at home against Cleveland to clinch the crown. These are the published final standings for the first half. As expected, Chicago and Pittsburgh were the 2 best teams, with Philadelphia just behind the leaders. Newark played only 11 games before abandoning the league for a long and hopefully profitable road trip. Nashville was a big disappointment, as we've already seen, the Cleveland Red Sox were an absolute disaster. Chicago's offense revolved around the club's trio of future Hall of Famers: center fielder Turkey Stearns, shortstop Willie Wells, and first baseman Mule Suttles. But the biggest reason the Giants won the first half was their pitching staff. Pictured here, left to right, are Shug Cornelius, Willie Foster, Ted Trent, Unknown, and Malvin Putt Powell. Foster's a Hall of Famer and Trent a perennial all-star, but Cornelius and Powell also pitched very well and made the American Giants an imposing opponent in a 4-game series. I found scores for 24 games, and this staff held their opponent to 3 or fewer runs in 15 of those 24, including 4 shutouts. And that's the biggest reason Chicago was first half champion. But there was no time for the American Giants to rest on their laurels. The first half ended July 4th, and the second half started 3 days later. And that's where we'll pick up this story in part 2 in July. Among my sources for this presentation were William McNeil's History of the California Winter League, William Plott's History of the Negro Southern League, James Riley's Biographical Encyclopedia. The good people at Sabre published a book on the 1934 Philadelphia Stars just moments after I decided I was going to do this series of presentation. Thank you, guys. And Bill Staple and Kazuo Sayama's History of Negro Leaguers in Japan. Websites consulted include the Sabre Bio Project and Sabre Games Project. Statistics and portraits came from sceneheads.com. The clippings are from newspapers.com, the ProQuest Historical Black Newspapers, and the Cleveland Public Library. And my most important resource is a pair of scrapbooks I assembled some 35 years ago, containing coverage of 1934 in the 2 leading Black newspapers of the time, the Pittsburgh Courier and Chicago Defender. I'd like to thank our collaborators, Lifeline Sports, Community Cup Classic Foundation, P5, the Partnership, and yours truly. And special thanks to our most valuable partner, Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. And I invite you all to join us once a month, first Saturday of every month, as we continue this series. I will be back in June with Barrier Breaking Moments, and I'll come back in July with the second half of the 34 season.